Welcome to this interactive session where we're going to be looking at a very exciting new project in Sri Lanka that is using ecosystem-based adaptation to address very pressing climate problems that we'll hear about as we go on today. And welcome all of you online who are listening and here in the room in a very dreary morning here in Glasgow, which is overcast, and I can't say that that's anything to do with climate change because that's fairly normal for this part of the world. But we're really happy to be with you, and we want to start by asking Anura Dissanayake, the Secretary in the Ministry of Irrigation in Sri Lanka, to tell us a little bit about this project from his perspective in Sri Lanka. Anura.
Thank you, Fergus. Thank you, Fergus. And then let me thank ICRAF for organizing this very important session and talk about this project that is to be commenced hopefully in January with the partnership of ICRAF and IUCN. As you may have heard, Sri Lanka is one of the most vulnerable island nation according to the annual index issued by the German Watch. And so Sri Lanka's topography is central mountain range and then flat areas or dry lands. And 103 rivers are coming from the mountains, and it flows down and then goes to the Indian Ocean via various provinces in the flatland. And we have 50,000 small tanks, medium and large tanks to restore our water for agriculture, for renewable energy, and then for industrial and drinking water purposes. So Ministry of Irrigation is the responsible agency in the country and entire water management. So we have 5 clients, 24/7 renewable energy, 24/7 drinking, and then seasonal agriculture, and then industrial and service demands. So Sri Lanka is blessed with average 2,000 millimeters of water from the rain, and then we get with the climate change, we have, though the pattern of rains have been changed, still we get the annual rainfall. But with the pattern of change had resulted so many additional new challenges before us. Every year, we had to, out of 60,000, 50,000 small tanks, approximately 800 to 1,000 small tanks are washing off due to heavy floods. And then on the other hand, it results in a drought in those particular neighborhoods. And same time, the mountain areas have been experiencing more rains, and then thereby the annual degradation of lands are increasing, and their livelihoods are being affected so badly. So how do we face this challenge? Is the issue before us. So the government had after realizing this situation way back in 2015, we have developed a new strategy to get our water and watershed management plan up to 2030. So this is one of the programs that we are eagerly looking for, identifying one watershed in the longest river of Sri Lanka called Mahavalley. And so this intervention will give us, it's approximately $50 million investment. It will, the major outcomes that we are expecting is not to make large infrastructures or to have a tangible asset base, but what we want to see is to identify the clear interventions, and then to see the behavioral changes that are required, and then the lessons learned could be realized in larger projects on infrastructure or otherwise. So, the other salient factor I should mention here is the annual with the annual rainfall. The country's land mass is getting approximately 150,000 MCM capacity of water from the rain to the ground, and as the country's topography is from mountain to flatland, all the rivers are flooding and then going down and ending most of the water in the Indian Ocean. Out of 150,000 MCMs, to capturable area, the water is falling at approximately 55,000 MCMs. But so far, our structures, our water structures, that is, small dams, big dams, ponds, and all these things can capture only 10,000 MCMs. But the requirement of the water for the demand and supply basis, we need at least 20,000. So we face water-related challenges on drought and drought relief, and then on the other hand, then since we don't manage our watersheds to face this the growing concern. So this initiative, I'm glad that we were able to partner with IUCN and ICRAFT, and with the ICRAFT scientific knowledge base, and then INI's present another CGIAR institution, headquarters is located in Sri Lanka, that is International Water Management Institute, and I am one of the board of governors there. And so with the blessings and the technical advice and support from all these great institutions, and then with the assistance of Green Climate Fund, I'm sure this ambitious project will give us the directions on how to multiply to entire the cascade system of downstream water management, and then upstream watershed management, and then to reduce flooding, reduce drought, and also reducing the land degradation. Unfortunately, our land degradation has been calculated. It's approximately 7,000 to 8,000 hectares per year. So this is all these are washed out and then creating downstream troubles. So basically, as the secretary in charge of water management in Sri Lanka, my expectation from the interventions of local and international institutions, IUCN is present in Sri Lanka, and INI is presence in Sri Lanka, and then ICRAFT is going to join us, and with other partners, I'm sure these interventions will bring about a greater results. And World Bank started a new project on watershed management to cover the Greater Mahaveli watershed, and we are working with IUCN, we are working with Green Climate Fund on co-financing, and then World Bank is expecting actually the outcomes and then some of the interventions that this particular Knuckles World Heritage Rainforest watershed management results to be incorporated and to magnify, and then to have larger interventions. So basically, what I have to say is, we are a country that we are facing a new set of challenges on top of this pandemic-related issues. We are the second next economic challenge that we are facing is the consequences of climate change. So basically, that is the outline of the background of Sri Lanka and our water sector. And maybe during the discussion, perhaps I can respond to some specific questions and specific intervention that we do with other partners. In fact, in dry zone, we are working with IUCN again, IUCN and with UNGP's partnership, we are doing cascade restoration work in mini watersheds in dry zone. So this is upper watersheds in the mountains. So this both these interventions will give us a roadmap for next 5 to 6 years of work.
Thank you so much, Anura Dissanayake, the Secretary to the Ministry of Irrigation. That's really given us a very clear idea of how important this project is for Sri Lanka. Let me now ask Jerry Velasquez from the Green Climate Fund to tell us the perspective from GCF about this project.
Thank you for allowing the GCF the opportunity to participate in this important event and to share GCF's perspective on the role of climate finance in enabling ecosystem-based adaptation. The Green Climate Fund recognizes the enormous opportunities of combining climate and biodiversity measures under ecosystem-based adaptation. Forests, agricultural lands, and marine ecosystems are central to our support for developing country climate action. The GCF, a $10 billion climate fund, has increased its financial volume approved for projects related to nature-based investments. Now, ecosystems, including forests, account for 22% of GCF's approved portfolio. GCF's vision is to create a paradigm shift towards ecosystem management to secure their resilience, functionality, and maintenance of ecosystem services under conditions of climate change. We cannot leave any ecosystem behind, as their health plays a key role in conference resilience to both people and nature. The role of the GCF is not only to enable EBA, it is about scaling up ecosystem-based adaptation while delivering adaptation benefits to society. EBA can hold greatest potential for success when fully understanding and mainstreaming its impacts and outcomes over the short and the long term. Understanding EBA's potential for upscaling implies having evidence of its effectiveness as an adaptation strategy and a measure to conserve and restore ecosystems. We urge GCF partners to strengthen their reporting efforts to inform EBA performance and its cost effectiveness under different climate scenarios. GCF's catalytic role starts by supporting countries in transformational planning and programming, all the way up to mobilizing climate finance at scale. And our ability to scale up EBA by providing climate finance on a scale not seen before depends on having the evidence needed to inform financial opportunities and financial structures. To close the financing gap of $536 billion per year until 2030, which is for nature conservation, countries will need to strengthen their institutional capacities to keep track of the state of the ecosystem's integrity for conferring resilience. The GCF stands ready to support countries in this regard. The GCF offers developing countries the advantage of accessing a full range of financial instruments, including grants, loans, equity, and guarantees, which can attract significant private finance for ecosystem-based adaptation, thanks to its size and to its risk appetite. This is of particular relevance for EBA interventions, which require investments with longer timeframes for delivering benefits. The GCF can also help upscale EBA by improving the risk profile of EBA investments, thus making EBA more attractive for private investors while improving the resilience of businesses. As GCF continues to expand, our new generation of GCF projects are expected to work on large-scale ecosystem conservation and restoration, as well as on EBA initiatives that highlight win-win solutions for people and planet, including concrete and innovative approaches in agro-ecosystems. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jerry. It's great to see the level of investment that GCF is now making in ecosystem-based adaptation. Now, let me turn to Sébastien de la Haye, who is from IUCN. IUCN is the accredited entity that is responsible for this new project in Sri Lanka. And I'd like to ask Sébastien to say a few words about how this fits with IUCN's outlook and portfolio. Sébastien.
Thank you, Fergus, and thank you very much for joining. First, thank you to you, Fergus, ICRAF, for the partnership and the invitation. Thanks to the government of Sri Lanka, of course, for their trust in IUCN, and thanks to the GCF for the support to do this. I will start by maybe recalling a bit what IUCN is about. And then second, I'll focus on the two main points where I see this specific project is contributing to our strategy. So IUCN, for the one who do not know, is the largest environmental network. It was created in 1948, so it makes us one of the oldest environmental organizations, if not the oldest. And we operate with three bodies, or three muscles, if I may. The first one is our membership. We are a membership organization. We have 1,300 members from state, government, and civil society organization. So it makes it unique. These members meet every 4 years to a congress where they discuss about motions and resolution on nature. The second body is made of 18,000 experts that constitute 6 commissions. And these 6 commissions are providing the knowledge that IUCN can disseminate. The most famous is the Red List of Threatened Species, which was created some 60 years ago. And the third body, which I am part of, is the Secretariat, which coordinates all this and try to meet the objective of IUCN, which is to influence policy on nature conservation and restoration. This is what we are doing currently at the COP here. And we try also to generate benefits to ecosystem and people on the ground. This is what we are doing with this project and with the GEF, GCF, and other donors. We've been accredited to the GCF for 5 years, and this has been key in what IUCN does. GCF, like the GEF, are not traditional donors. They are instruments for IUCN, instruments to mobilize the membership base and to scale up our efforts on the ground. So we work on many areas. Our next program focuses on land, ocean, water, people, and climate. And as you know, since 1948, the approach to nature conservation has significantly changed. What we are trying to do now is really to combine nature conservation, nature restoration with economic health. So we have an equation to solve there. And one of the solutions we are providing is nature. And nature-based solution can definitely help to fix this equation and solve it. Nature-based solutions have the potential to provide drinking water to 1.4 billion people, contribute to 37% of the mitigation ambition of the Paris Agreement, under the Paris Agreement, and provide and generate ecosystem services to the amount of 170 billion a year. So it's important. How do we do that? 2 points that this project is addressing. The first one is that it's critical to work at a landscape level. If you look at the Knuckles range, it's 1/5 of the countries in Sri Lanka, 1/6. It's a major part of the country. So it includes many things. Agriculture is key to the Sri Lankan economy. It's key to livelihood, but it depends on water. And water depends on watersheds. And watershed depend on land health. Land health is reliant on land planning. And this is what we are trying to do with the government, with ICRAF, in this project, looking at ecosystem problems, trying to fix them, working at the policy level on land use planning. And land health is really at the center of IUCN strategy on agriculture, because agriculture can be a nature-based solution. The second thing is sustainability. No one wants to see a project that when it ends, the activities that we've been promoting are stopped. And for that, we have to make sure that what we are proposing remains in the genes of the landscape and the broader framework. So, as I was saying before, what we are trying to reconciling is nature and economic benefits. So it means that we have to put nature going beyond the work we are doing at the community level, at the landscape level, into macroeconomic framework. So if I can use a metaphor here, what we have to do is modify the macroeconomic framework, and to modify it, it's like modifying an engine. And to modify the engine, you need to modify the gas you are putting into it. So what do you work on here? It's private sector. We need to make sure that with the activities we are making, we are mobilizing the private sector, and that the private sector gets into what will be regenerating agriculture, nature through climate-smart agriculture, through restoration, etc. And this project is doing it by establishing the framework and the systems for payment for ecosystem services. It supports green enterprises in some specific value chains, in particular the rice sector. And this will trickle down to livelihoods. So through the policy work, through the work on private sector, investment, the enabling environment, we hope we are going to change the landscape, but also change the policies and go beyond. So that when the project stops, the economic system is made in a way that can bring us to nature positive. So to conclude, we are really seeing our projects as investment. Investment that will make the economy more resilient in that case by ensuring there are nature-based solutions and that what we are providing remains in the long run because it is taken over by the private sector through a good regulatory environment in Sri Lanka. I'll stop there, I think, Fergus.
Thank you so much, Sebastian. That was a very full explanation, not just of the position of the Sri Lanka project, but also how that really fits into the whole of IUCN. And I was learning quite a lot just listening to what you were saying about IUCN as a whole. Now, that concludes the sort of framing of this session in terms of the key institutions that are involved in developing and implementing the project. And what I want to switch now to is the science, and to look at, firstly, what the climate change impacts are that the ecosystem-based adaptation needs to deal with. And I'm going to ask Roland Kint from ICRAF to tell us about the predicted effects of climate change in Sri Lanka. Roland.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to present. My name is Roland Kent. So in this presentation, I will be focusing on some of the climate change projections for the project area. So as you can see from this slide, Sri Lanka has different climatic zones that are defined by the annual rainfall. And the project area consists of the Knuckles catchment area in the south, That's more of a intermediate rainfall area, and then it has some various downstream areas that are in drylands. This slide shows the projected changes in monthly rainfall. So based on the cropping calendar of Sri Lanka, the months are colored based on being a month where crops are being sown, shown in brown, whether crops are growing, now shown in green, and harvesting months, now shown in yellow. And the coloring scheme of the map itself shows the number of global climate models that project an increase in rainfall. So the yellowish colors on the map actually show a decrease in rainfall with 6 or fewer models predicting an increase. And the reverse is the case for the months of October and November, now where climate models have a consensus more on increases of rainfall. And this slide focuses on 2 months, now one month of January, now where the models agree on a decrease in rainfall, and the month of October, now where we can see an increase of rainfall. And the percentages are based on percentile values. And this slide shows the range of values for the 2 months that were shown in the previous slide, January and October. So, whereas the consensus among models tends to be towards a decrease in rainfall in January and an increase in October, one can also see the wide range among the climate models. Sometimes I think that also this range among models is also an expression of the variation among years. So there will be wet years and dry years. But the main message from this slide is the wide range still among the models, although they tend to agree on the general trend. In the remaining slides on the climate change analysis, I will focus now on the moisture index. An alternative name for this index is the aridity index, although I prefer the name of moisture index because increasing values indicate areas with higher moisture. So globally, this moisture index is used to map different types of drylands, as you can see here. But what I will use in the analysis is monthly values, and these are also used to look at dry months and growing months. Now, using the monthly moisture index, we can see a similar pattern as with rainfall. So with decreasing moisture index now in the critical month of January, now a growing month, but also a big effect now in the month of May. So where the effect of rainfall was not as clear. When we look at the moisture index now, which also combines the effect of increasing temperatures in the future, you can also see significantly decreasing moisture index in the month of May. In the other sowing months that we identified earlier, there's still an increasing moisture index for the month of October, but less so in the month of November. In this slide, we look again at the monthly moisture index, but now zoomed in to the project area. So it is maybe clearer now that there will be decreases in moisture index in January and May, and increases in October as sowing month. Let me take an opportunity now to showcase some of the tools that we have developed at C4 ECRAF. So quite a number of the tools are assembled under the Global Tree Knowledge platform, and they are all geared at selecting the right tree for the right place and also for the right climate and purpose. So I would like to invite you to have a look at the website shown here if you're interested. And those especially interested in using some of the tools for climate change analysis, one of the apps that we have is the Biodiversity R package that's used for ensemble suitability modeling. In the past, we created a climate change atlas for Central America, and we're about to publish a climate change atlas for Africa now. And more widely, the same software and methods have been used in other areas around the world. So if you're interested, please have a look, and also please feel free to get in touch with me.
Thank you, Roland. That's a very full and detailed analysis of how climate is predicted to change in ways that affect agriculture and land use in Sri Lanka. Now, I just want to connect what Roland has just been talking about to the climate rationale for this GCF investment. Can I have the first slide? So, what is really significant in Sri Lanka, and Mr. Dissanayake was alluding to this in his introductory remarks, is that since time immemorial, the agriculture in Sri Lanka is mainly, the key rice growing areas are actually in the dry lowland areas, and they receive irrigation water, which is generated in the wet upland areas. And critical to this is then the storage of water in reservoirs that allows for that irrigation to happen. So that transfer of water is critical to food security in Sri Lanka, and it's dependent, of course, on the storage capacity of reservoirs. Next slide, please. Now, what Roland has just told us is essentially that in key months of the year, the predictions are for more and more intense rainfall in the uplands. And that generates erosion, soil erosion, which results in sediment flow, and the sediment ends up reducing reservoir capacity. So, in order to protect the available water for dryland irrigation, we need to stop sedimentation, reducing reservoir capacity. And that means land restoration and good practice and management in those upland areas. Now, the reason that that there's a sort of double whammy of climate change impacts in Sri Lanka is that at the same time, we've got increased frequency and severity of drought because of higher potential evapotranspiration in the lowland areas where the rice is grown. So the requirement for water is actually going up in those lowland areas. So we've got this two-pronged set of problems, more erosive rainfall in the uplands, leading to sedimentation, and a greater requirement for water to maintain rice production in the lowlands. Next slide, please. So this creates a really serious issue in terms of the response. And there is a need to be able to connect the revenues that come from water in the uplands to the rehabilitation and maintenance of the integrity, the ecological integrity of those upland areas. The ecosystem services that, payment for ecosystem services that Sebastian was referring to. And there are a number of issues that make this quite complex, and this includes the fact that watershed and administrative boundaries are not congruent. And so you need to create governance structures that are able to manage both the human and administrative aspects of land use, but in relation to the watersheds that exist. And without effort to bring those two things together, it's quite difficult to get it to happen. And there's also two critical aspects. In the upper catchment, there are issues of the sustainability of the land use itself. So there are quite a lot of now even tea estates, other important agricultural production systems that are facing problems because of land degradation. And as degradation has progressed, the erosivity and the integrity of those systems has decreased. So reinvigorating these systems in order to make them sustainable and to be able to invest in good practices that will reduce sediment flow from the catchment is absolutely essential. And then in the lowland areas, there's an issue of agroecological intensification in relation to the use of water in rice production and trying to be efficient in that use in order to be able to continue to grow enough rice with the available water from the reservoir system. Next slide, please. So, the design of this GCF project has three key components. And in the green parts of the diagram that you can see now, right in the center, that is the actual on-the-ground interventions to improve the ecological integrity of the headwaters in the Knuckles area. So that is using land use practices in order to reduce sediment flow, to improve productivity. And that's really important because if the productivity of the smallholder farmers in the uplands is not high enough, then the whole upland catchment is unsustainable. So that green area is where the majority of the resources of this project go, and that is to actually make a difference on the ground in terms of managing the stream side protection, in terms of erosion, the roadside protection, and basically the management of water in the upland areas, and then, of course, the agroecological intensification of the use of water in the lowland areas. Now, this can only be sustained if we have the finance to do it. And as Sebastian mentioned, the way that this project does this is to set up payment for environmental services schemes, which we'll hear a little bit about in a moment in terms of their detail, and value chain upgrading of the agricultural systems, ecotourism, the ways in which value can be captured in the upland areas in order to continue to finance sustainable practice. And it's only if we can upgrade that value that is obtained in the upland areas that we will have a sustainable land use that isn't generating sediment flow. Now, in order for all that to work, we need a governance structure and we need a real shift towards co-creation of knowledge with farmers. We need a much more nuanced ability to match options for sustainable land use with the context that different farmers face, rather than trying to operate with silver bullets for large agroecological areas. And that, of course, means that we need the right policy structures and social capital at different scales in order to manage the matching of options to contexts. And at this point, I want to move to ask Tor Vagen to tell us how we can pinpoint and target the key areas where it's most important to make interventions in order to drive governance through an understanding of how land use is impacting and affecting soil erosion. Tor.
Hi everyone, and welcome to this presentation on assessing and mapping soil and land health in Sri Lanka. So I'll be talking a bit about how we can use technologies and methods that we've been developing at eCRAF and that we are implementing in Sri Lanka at the moment to pinpoint where land degradation is taking place, how we can use rapid and cost-effective assessments to look at soil health at scale, and of course, finally, a little bit on monitoring and how we can combine various elements of this to look at effectiveness of interventions over time. Land degradation is obviously defined in many different ways. One way to define it, this is according to GEF, is as the deterioration of or loss of the productive capacity of the soils for present and future. So we know, all of us, that land degradation is widespread. We know that it affects everyone through food insecurity, through higher food prices, and also it's really important for climate change, both in terms of mitigation, but also in terms of adaptation potential. Finally, environmental hazards such as frequency of flooding and so on are impacted by land degradation. And of course, we have loss of biodiversity and ecosystem services. So we need indicators that are science-based, that we can measure readily, that are robust, to assess land degradation. And we need to do this in a way that is spatially explicit, or in a way that allows us to target specifically on the ground where to go with interventions and where to track changes over time. So the Land Degradation Surveillance Framework, the Ldsf, was developed in response to this need for robust indicators. The need for specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound indicators. You can see here on the right some of the indicators that are in the part of the Ldsf, including various indicators of vegetation cover, including biodiversity, land degradation, such as, for example, soil erosion prevalence, which is, of course, a very important indicator of land degradation, We also look at land management and soil hydrology, and finally soil health variables such as soil organic carbon, which we all know is really critical because it reflects so many aspects of land health and land degradation. So with all these indicators, we can then get a better sense of what the state of things are within a landscape in terms of land degradation and also in terms of restoration potential. The land degradation surveillance of the Ldsf is basically now a global network of sites that we've been building for a number of years now. But the nice thing about the method, and these markers that you see on the map all represent sites. Each one is a 10 by 10 kilometer landscape or 100 square kilometers. And the beauty of the method is that, yes, it's a global network of sites, but the way that the sampling is designed and then the way the method is designed, it gives us local relevance as well. So we can have global reach with indicators, but also look at local variations and target very explicitly, even to the scale of a farmer's field, the various types of assessments that we make. And we'll see a couple of examples a bit later. The key thing here is that we are working to generate evidence and information that is actionable, that can inform land restoration interventions and also inform monitoring. And of course, inform interventions for more resilient landscapes, which ultimately is what we want to achieve. So in Sri Lanka, we're in the process of building a network of Ldsf sites. Here is a map of Sri Lanka, and you can see in orange color there is Motale, which is one of the sites that we completed in 2020. And then we have some sites that are planned and then that are already randomized and ready to go. And then we have in those blue boxes potential sites that we've proposed and that we are still discussing, but the idea is that we would like to expand this network and establish sites across a wide range of different ecosystems within Sri Lanka to allow us to do robust assessments of land degradation and also restoration potential within the country. So the whole idea here is to pinpoint where to focus investments and interventions to restore degraded land. So I'll show you some examples from Kala Oya Basin and the Landa Oya and sort of central Sri Lanka, which is where we've been piloting, where that one Ldsf site that we have completed is located in the Landa Oya in the southern part. And so this is a landscape that is very important and where land degradation, there parts of the landscape have quite a lot of land degradation. So we've been working with our partners in Sri Lanka on establishing a site there, but also in doing the assessments and the mapping of land degradation. So we combine the field data that we collect using the Ldsf or the ground truth with Earth observation or remote sensing data to spatially assess land health. So we use a number of different sensors for this. For example, Landsat, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with, or Sentinel-2, which is a bit more recent, but run by the European Space Agency. And often we combine these sensors. But the key here is that it's all based on the field data, the ground truth, and then the combination of with the Earth observation data and the use of statistical models or machine learning, if you will. So that allows us to map different processes of land degradation. So here I've included an example for that landscape that I just showed you earlier, and where for soil erosion. And you can see the map in the middle. This is 2016. You can see that map in the middle where the areas where we have hotspots of erosion, as in very high erosion, are kind of orange and yellow. And doesn't mean that no erosion occurs elsewhere, but that's where we have very high occurrence. And so you can see that map in the middle there where we have some hotspot areas, and I've zoomed into a couple of those on the left. So the idea here is that we can look at erosion across multiple scales within this landscape, and we can look at it in a lot of detail, as you can see on the left there, where we can see erosion patterns across farmers' fields and around some of the dams, for example, the riverways, etc. The idea with the Ldsf is that what we're interested in doing in terms of erosion is looking at the prevalence of erosion or the occurrence of erosion, how severe it is within a landscape. Then we combine this information that we have about erosion and about all these other Ldsf indicators that I showed you earlier. We combine that with soil information to look at soil health so that we can get a holistic view of land health overall. So for the soil health aspects of this work, new technologies such as soil spectroscopy are really important. They create opportunities for scaling assessments of soil health, and these are technologies that we've been working on at eCRAF for about 15 to 20 years now. So we have a large spectral library, very consistent data that allows us to scale these assessments because this type of analysis is low cost, it's cost effective. And the beauty of it, when we use mid-infrared or near-infrared spectroscopy, is that we can provide accurate and robust low-cost analysis of multiple properties at the same time. And it can be used to analyze plants, compost, manure, fertilizer, liquids, and soil. So not just soil, but all these other things as well. So the moment you establish a lab with this kind of technology, which is something we hope to be able to do in Sri Lanka, then you have the ability to analyze a range of different things at the same time, but also a range of different materials. So this way we can do landscape scale sampling, which we couldn't do before because the costs were prohibitive. And this has really transformed how we do research. And of course, it does require some new skills in terms of soil scientists, but it is truly transformational in terms of what we can do around soil health at scale. So I'll just show you one example from this landscape again in central Sri Lanka, 2 soil maps that are based on the Ldsf and the soil data that we collect. So on the left, we have soil pH, and on the right, we have soil organic carbon. So I mentioned in the beginning soil organic carbon as a really important indicator of soil health. And here we have a map at 30-meter resolution where we can see the variations in carbon. We can see in the forested systems there, in the southern part, for example, with the darker shades of brown, those are areas with higher carbon. And then we can see parts of the more northern section of that map where we have low carbon or lower carbon, below 20 grams per kilo, which we would consider low in these particular systems. So the beauty of this, again, this is 2016, but the beauty of this is that we can run this type of analysis for any year, so we can look at changes over time. Finally, just to sum up, using a combination of the remote sensing and the systematic field sampling in the Ldsf, we can look at these types of things that I've shown you on the maps, like various types of indicators, how they vary over, in space, but also how they vary over time. And then we combine this also with citizen science to get another angle in terms of data collection. So the beauty of this is really in the combination of the structured data collection coming from the Ldsf and the citizen science aspects of it, and then the use of all these new technologies. So that gives us a lot of potential for assessing and mapping soil and land health in Sri Lanka. Thank you very much.
So thank you, Tor. And I think it's very exciting that a new spectroscopy laboratory will be set up in Sri Lanka as part of the GCF project. And that's part of the sustainability of this type of work. It's not being done by international organizations somewhere else, but it's the capacity being developed in Sri Lanka to be able to do this type of analysis within the country and to use that information to target the interventions. And not just to target, but also then to monitor whether or not the interventions that are made are actually having the impacts that they should, and then to have the adaptive management to change things as you go on to make sure that objectives are being achieved. So let me now move to ask Lei to say something about the payment for ecosystem services, because that's what really connects all these things together. It's only by realizing the value of the water that's coming from the uplands and putting it back into the restoration and management of those uplands that this type of program can be sustainable. Lei.
Securing financing mechanism for sustainable landscape management is crucial for farmers and land managers to adopt more environmentally benign land uses and generate ecosystem services. To ensure such adoption, the most important conditions to be met is how climate-smart agricultural practices are sufficiently profitable. So farmers and plantations companies continue to invest in such practices. In these presentations, I'm sharing some principles in mobilizing finance, particularly that is focusing on sustainable production landscape across sectors and institutions. Towards the end of presentations, I will reflect on how the designs of our GCF project is interconnected to provide enabling conditions for such integrated landscape finance to strengthen the climate resilience of subsistence farmers and agricultural plantations community that residing in our locations in the Knuckles Mountain catchment of Sri Lanka. The previous presentation has shown that combating land degradation needs a landscape approach, as we recognize that each component of the landscape is interconnected and forms a socio-ecological system. So it's shaped by its local context and cultures. Landscape management implies that stakeholders must be better aligned and have integrated efforts to sustain and restore natural resources and ecosystem services. And landscape management also improves human well-being and strengthens local economies at scale. On the other hand, while financial innovations have become more widespread to fund green businesses, enterprises, and projects, mostly these interventions focus on individuals and specific investment only. The challenge from the smallholders and micro, small, medium-sized enterprises is that there are limited institutional mechanisms to access large pools of funds for disbursement to these smallholdings, particularly for them meeting green businesses at scale. And meanwhile, to ensure that landscape management and partnership endure, more comprehensive and coordinated landscape financing strategies are highly important. Integrated landscape finance is an innovation that is driven by challenges faced by such landscape partnership and investor. So it aims at encouraging synergies between investment to generate impacts at scale across multiple landscape objectives. The concept of integrated landscape finance draws from related developing fields, including impact investing, conservation finance, collaborative place-based impact investing, blended finance, and inclusive green growth approaches. Further, support to multi-stakeholder dialogue and action platforms, strategic planning and coordination, setting up new finance and policy mechanisms, and not to forget the integrated landscape assessment and sustainability monitoring cannot be detached from the design and implementations of the integrated landscape finance. Successful landscape scale transformations toward climate resilience production landscape requires what's so-called the integrated landscape investment portfolio. So the integrated landscape investment portfolio is a set of investments from a variety of sectors that taken as a whole contribute to the multiple landscape scale objective as mentioned previously. So this slide illustrates an example of an integrated landscape investment portfolio that might be relevant for Sri Lanka and other developing countries in the context of production landscape. In this example, in the upstream of the watershed, the green bond that is publicly published by the national government can be invested to ensure that forests, especially those are titled as conservation areas and national parks, are well protected and well managed. Carbon funds can be allocated for both forest protections and reforestation, while in the midstream, the payment for ecosystem services can be invested by the public and private sectors for farmers who are cultivating agroforestry system and practicing good soil and water conservation on their farming lands. All these practices provide ecosystem service stock and flow access for the downstream beneficiaries. And when the beneficiaries come from the other jurisdictions, then ecological fiscal transfer specifying for ecosystem service provisions can be applied as another level of PES. A jurisdiction, name it as a province, district, or region that commit to the green growth development and provide ecosystem services, can receive a fiscal transfer from other jurisdictions with similar level, like for example from their neighboring region in the downstream area, or central government, as this green region has contributed in achieving national commitments on sustainability. From the perspective of agriculture sector, when farmers and agricultural plantation apply good agriculture practices and commits to sustainability, then these recognized and verified by certification body, then they entitled to premium prices from their commodity. Reflecting on Indonesian case for oil palm, green commodity levy can also contribute to rejuvenating and rehabilitating aging, non-productive plantations, and also facilitating the access for smallholder plantation community to sustainability certification, particularly the ones that cultivate the commercially exported commodity. And meanwhile, when the financial incentive from ecosystem services has not been able to fully compensate their land manager, these land managers' opportunity cost compared to the business as usual, microloans can bridge during the grace period or at the transitions to the sustainable practices. Microloans also can support value added from the agricultural commodity. And in addition to that, there is also another financing instrument such as the corporate social responsibility or CSR. This can be directed towards asset investments for the agriculture-based rural community. For example, for productions of value chain activity, for green infrastructure, and also business incubations for the youth. Diverse public, private, and civic actors can support the generations and channeling of funding for system of integrated landscape finance. This slide shows the variety of actors that engage in this financing system. You can list all the interconnected ministries from forestry, agriculture, finance, and even internal affairs, subnational government, public and private corporations, that are benefiting from ecosystem services and sustainable development in broad area. The existence of multi-stakeholder forum is beneficial as the coordinating point and also facilitator of the process. And then the needs of environmental fund institutions that have flexibility and legality to source, invest, and distribute the result-based payment is also critical in the applications of integrated landscape finance system. The establishment of payment for ecosystem services in Sri Lanka indeed has still some challenges, ranging from the willingness to engage to limited capacity in ensuring that the payment is generated and performed effectively, especially in producing real impacts on ecosystem services. However, from the opportunity sought in the project design, it is clear that the PES cannot be a standalone and needs to be treated as a part of integrated landscape finance and investment portfolios. This is the result of a quick search from the online sources, some existing PES schemes in Sri Lanka, and there is indeed a need to identify the lessons so that the new initiative can learn and improve. Here we map how each component, output, and activity of the project is interlinked, starting from the improvement of land and water management, value chain improvement, and landscape financing and governance. Finally, some key points of the presentation are: first, we recognize that well-coordinated design components are an incipient step towards integrated landscape finance. It covers assessing the spatial configurations of the landscape and also ecosystem service measurement, identifying socioeconomic contexts, including profitability of climate-smart agriculture and transaction costs for establishment of a payment for ecosystem services, and recognizing existing landscape governance. Second, we understand that payment for ecosystem services is a part of an integrated landscape investment portfolio. Targeting only a single instrument of financing may not be sufficiently effective to achieve multiple landscape objectives. And lastly, integrated landscape finance needs to address innovations on institutional and financial systems that can support landscape investment at scale. And policy actions is also very critical to advance the diversified landscape investment portfolios. We thank you for your attention and we are welcoming your comments and inputs.
Well, thank you, Lei, for a very full explanation of the range of payment for environmental services that are necessary and the sort of ecosystem of measures needed to make a sustainable pathway forward. I'd like now to turn to Chris Dharmakirti to tie all this together and talk a little bit about governance. And we've had a question on the internet Q&A from Andrea Chivari asking how we're assessing social impact. So, Chris, if you can allude to that and address Andrea's question as you're talking, that would be great. We're tight on time, so if you can take 5 minutes, Chris, that would be wonderful.
Thank you, Fergus, for that. Yeah, I think you asked me to address the fact that the social impact assessment, I mean, there was a environmental social management framework that was developed when this project was being designed. And as you probably know, and for those who are new to this, the project area has about 40,000 hectares of forest reserves, and there are about, from a governance perspective, there are 26 divisional secretariat areas that are actually in control of the area that we are dealing with. And the subsistence farmers that we are talking about in the upper catchment of the Knuckles region and the downstream farmers, each of them have different requirements of elevating their social status and their economic status. And the cropping intensity was the figure that we looked at in terms of the design, because the cropping intensity for Sri Lanka on average is 2, which means they can plant twice a year 2 sets of crops in 2 succession periods. And of course, there are some who have cropping intensity of 3, but in the Knuckles upper watershed, the cropping intensity is just 1, simply because there is no storage of rainwater, and therefore the farming activities are focused on just the rain period for farming. And in that sense, they have less of an opportunity to create income sources for themselves. And with the climate change, changing the weather patterns with intense rain periods, their options for using different intersessional crops have also diminished. So with all of that, I think the project has designed to improve the water storage facilities for the upland farmers, and also look at shorter cropping cycles and look at the cropping options the farmers would have, both to give them because they are subsistence farmers, they're growing partly for their own consumption, and therefore the yield options on some of the crops that they would grow would provide the resilience. So that's one part. Then diversification of income sources for them by having the value chain developed in terms of processing some of the high value crops that they're growing, getting into organic agriculture, and there's an organic zone that has been created downstream in the foothills of Knuckles, which is part of the project area. And there's the first ever organic zone that has been declared because the water is the purest water in Sri Lanka, with absolutely no contaminant sources upstream to contaminate that particular body of water. So therefore, and it's also a territory that the farmers are farming, which has very little pollution from agrochemicals. So consequently, that group of farmers have the opportunity to position themselves in the market for a higher price as a certified organic product. So again, developing those value chains and identifying the opportunities for those farmers is part of this particular project design. And of course, enabling the communities to understand the adaptive nature that they need to now have because of the dynamic status of the weather patterns and the cropping sessions and the pollination cycles. All of that is changing. So the evidence-based opportunities for the communities to be given data and data to be shared regularly, and for them to be adaptive to using that data for them to do their land use planning. So that's part of the project design as well. So given what I was going to talk about, if you can please put on the slide of the presentation that I had lined up, which was to talk about governance. I think there is two aspects that I would like you to, if you can put the slide on, please.
Can we get the Chris's slide? It may, Chris, be that because we've got you.
No, it's all right. I can speak on. That's okay. I will.
Then I hear it's up, Chris.
Okay. It may be up there. It's not up on my screen.
It says governance.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. All right. If we can move to the next slide, please. So, I think I'll have to open it here on my one. Yeah. Okay. So, effectively, as for the Knuckles project, I mean, we're talking about governance and social accountability and so forth. There's obviously a dual accountability here for the project to be accountable both to GCF for its set of standards and requirements, as well as the government of Sri Lanka's own governance requirements. And as a signatory to the UNFCCC, as you know, as a state party to that convention, Sri Lanka as government will abide by the GCF requirements because they have signed on to those principles. And equally, whilst GCF has stipulated a very, very strong set of ESS governance requirements, the policies and legislation of the government of Sri Lanka is also quite extensive. When we were doing the environmental and social management framework, I mean, we could probably spend 2 hours talking about each of the different laws and rules that the government of Sri Lanka has adopted, and particularly for Knuckles, because of the binding obligations of the international conventions, and because UNESCO declared the Knuckles as a protected area, as a World Heritage Site as part of the Central Highlands complex, and the Knuckles Conservation Forest area, which forms part of our operating area for this particular project, is quite a unique area that hosts a lot of endemic species in both fauna and flora. So there's a double whammy here in terms of making sure that that whatever land use activity that is being planned in the project does not hurt the biological diversity, and in fact it enhances it and should create the opportunity for that biodiversity that is endemic and in some instances that are red list is protected and preserved, so that the stakeholders on the ground are better trained and prepared to work within that environment. But equally, the governance side has to look at in terms of what's happened to the threatened species and whether there is an improvement in the way the landscape has been managed during the period of the project. Next slide, please. So in that situation, when we looked at what sort of governance models I mean, one should look at, obviously, because Knuckles has this biodiversity focus as much as from a Mahabali Authority perspective, there's a water focus. But if you think about it, the conservation factor is quite high for this particular area. And of course, while the conservation for the biodiversity is there, there's also the biomass conservation factor that's driving the Mahabali Authority to consider this reforestation of the particular area, and also the soil erosion prevention measures that has to be put in place, because of the quantum of water that flows from the hills down to the reservoirs is quite extensive because of high erosion, and there is no groundwater infiltration and holding of the water within the uplands, which is getting well threatened partly because of land degradation. So in terms of making the community to understand the importance of doing better soil conservation and erosion prevention measures, and growing and replacing the pinus forest with natural forest is part of the plan for this particular project, and that would enable to a great extent to improve the environmental governance side of things. And of course, the B2B ratio of biodiversity and biomass has to be improved. So when one looks at how things have been managed in the past before this GCF project came into the area, I mean, there's been GEF projects there, IUCN projects there, there's been a number of other initiatives, and it's been a hierarchical sort of a model of governance that has been always practiced and in Sri Lanka. And but of course, there has been attempts to introduce a community participatory model of governance in these areas. And I must say that it has, to a great extent, worked. Both. It's a hybrid, because in some instances, the locals like the participatory approach, and indeed they make a contribution, and it's worked. And as Fergus was talking about earlier on, there was the concept of options by context, and in that options by context with an adaptive management attitude, one does have the participatory nature, which is critical. But equally, there has to be the writ of the hierarchical model, because we are governed by the UNESCO conventions and the Biodiversity Convention, and a number of other conventions that Sri Lanka is signatory to. And in some instances, local actors and politicians and truant business groups do not want to conform to certain standards of land use management. So that has to be addressed. And in that context, we thought about it quite a lot. And then we realized that it's very difficult to get conservation governance going, or even land use governance going, unless the central government is making them realize the negative financial impact. So it could be tourism dollars that's they're losing because of the conservation degradation, or it could be the water, a reduction in water quantum that's coming into the reservoirs, or the siltation of the reservoirs because of bad land management, that is then reducing the quantum of storing of water, and of course, as a consequence, the hydropower generation capacity for the Mahabali. So how do you then get these environmental impacts understood by the decision makers to the extent that they would actually change behavior? So at a community level, how do you make them understand that they need to change their behavior because it's going to benefit them? And at the level of the government and local government, how do you make them to understand that they need to pay attention to the need for better land management practices? And the Land Use Policy Planning Department of Sri Lanka, which is a huge institution with a large footprint across the country, including a district office in the Knuckles footprint, have done on 48 indicators a substantial mapping exercise. So all of that has to be related. So we felt that probably the best way to get a better governance model for this particular area would be for Sri Lanka to push through the systems of environmental economic accounting, the CR framework that the UN developed. So in 2008, we created when Secretary Mr. Disanayake was there at the Ministry of Environment, the CR framework accounting, the green accounting framework, a committee was established at the interministerial level. And that committee has been, since that time, we have had a number of people, Dr. Pawan Sukhdev and others coming here to look at natural capital and teaching the departments of census and statistics to adopt kind of a large-scale restoration by mapping where ecosystems are degraded, by monitoring changes in the ecosystem's conditions. And so the CR ecosystem accounts would be a fantastic way for us to get the central government and the local and the regional government to be accountable and to be held responsible for any degradation and other impacts. So this is I would say would be a bigger opportunity in this particular project to see that this framework gets implemented, and there's a commitment to pilot this across the Knuckles GCF project area, and that's a large area in itself. And of course, if you think about the CR framework, next slide, please.
Chris, we've run out of time but I think you've really outlined incredibly well the sort of paternoster principle of working bottom up and top down at the same time in order to deliver on this critical project. Because of the next GLF session is coming on very quickly, we're going to have to draw this session to a close. There are a number of questions in the internet, and we will ask their specific questions related to parts of the presentation. So we'll ask the relevant people to answer those questions in the Q&A. There's one on Ldsf, there's one on the payments for ecosystem services. So I'd like to thank everybody for your participation in this session. It's been really revealing, and we've gone into quite a bit of detail about how things are going to pan out in what's a very novel project in Sri Lanka that's got high expectations in terms of delivery. And I just want to leave you with the announcement that the President of Sri Lanka will be taking part in the agroecology plenary between 6 o'clock and 7 o'clock this evening in Glasgow, GMT, talking about the innovative policies at a national level to make an agroecological transition. So with that, I would like to thank everybody and encourage you to stay engaged during the other sessions in this fantastic food day in the Global Landscapes Forum. Thank you.